Hello, it's Jennifer and I'm glad you're here. So today I am excited because I'm sharing a fun inking technique and it builds on the video that I put up yesterday. If you haven't watched that video, please do so first. I'll link to it up here on the top right and in my description below. In that video, I showed a bunch of different examples of doing partial die cutting to get new looks from your dies, and you can see those die cut pieces on these examples. Well, today I'm taking those pieces and adding color to them, and I'm doing a fun and fast and easy technique using a gel press to do this. The best part is you get bonus backgrounds to use on other cards. Now, I promise this is not overwhelming. Gel press can sometimes be overwhelming, but I'm using it with stamping inks, so it's very approachable. I really hope you'll try it. I also have some bonus techniques, including using foil with a piercing die. So stick with me, I've got a lot to share. So let's get started, and I've got a bunch of cards for you. Now I am using, as I mentioned, a gel press. There are many different sizes and shapes of gel press. It doesn't matter which you get. This is a tool that can be used over and over in your craft room, and it can be used in many ways. I'm also using a Holtz Brayer. That's a tool in my left hand. This is definitely my favorite of the different brayers out there. Oftentimes people use paints with their gel press, but I like to use stamping inks because I have those on hand and it allows me to get more life from them. Today I'm using Simon's Stamp Saturated Inks. These are a dye ink that really work well with a gel press. I highly recommend them, but any dye inks would work for this. You could even use Distress Oxide inks, pigment inks, it doesn't matter. There are many beautiful colors in this saturated ink collection, and I have a free ink swatch download over on my blog if that's helpful to you. I will do a color comparison of these inks in a future video. So what I'll start with is inking up a bunch of die cuts. All of the die cutting I did in this video and my last one was done with basic white cardstock, any type of white cardstock, and I'm adding the color with the ink. So I ink up my brayer by rolling it onto my ink pad. And then I ink over both sides of my die cut. The reason I do both sides is when you die cut something, there's like a rounded edge to it, and you want to get into those edges. So by inking on both sides on the soft gel press, you're able to really get into those nooks and crannies. Now here's the best part. Any excess ink that's on my gel press and on my brayer, I don't let that go to waste. I put it onto a piece of scrap white cardstock. That will build up ink over time and be a beautiful background. So watch as I do this. I pick up some ink with my brayer and put it onto the gel press. I lay the die cut onto that ink and put more ink on top of the die cut. So I do this a few times so that I can really saturate that die cut with color so it looks like I used pink cardstock, but I really used white. Now there's leftover ink on my gel press, so I'm just rolling it with my brayer to smooth it out. Then I'll bring that piece of scrap cardstock and press it on there, transferring the ink onto that cardstock. And on the back, by pressing down with my brayer, I'm cleaning it, so I'm ready for my next color. So you can see how the color is building up. Now here I've moved on to a different color. This is the cheeky color, which I just think is beautiful. Putting some onto the gel press, then putting some onto the back of the die cut too, and I just kind of flip it around a few times, applying ink. There will still be lots of ink on the gel press and the brayer, and I'll put that onto that scrap background. So watch, I'm just going to put it over a little area of it, just that middle area there. Just clean my brayer on the back of that cardstock, and watch that, I'm building up color. As I mentioned, there are many different inks you could use for this technique. You could use any dye inks, but I find that this particular formulation of ink works really well on the gel press. It doesn't kind of bubble up as much, and you get smoother results. But whatever dye ink you have will work. You can also use distress inks, but I think Distress Oxide inks work much better here. You could also use pigment inks. So just try what you have. I find that the gel press is an inexpensive tool for the number of things that you can do with it. I've done videos with the gel press in the past, and I'll link to a playlist up here on the top right. And I've just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg with using the gel press. There are so many techniques you can do with acrylic paints, alcohol inks, and much more. I've so far only stuck with inks because I'm kind of working my way into this. Now notice I put some green on top of that pink and the orange on my scrap paper, and it still adds beautiful color and creates a really cool looking background. So don't be afraid to overlap colors on that scrap background. So you see I'm doing a bunch of different die cuts, coloring them with different color inks, and putting that extra ink onto scrap paper. This time I went to a fresh piece so I could have this darker green and it wouldn't overpower the pinks I did before. So you can do multiple backgrounds and just build up the color. Now this is a huge time saver for me for a few reasons. One is I can do all of my die cutting from white cardstock. I don't have to dig through my cardstock and find the colors I want. Also, colored cardstock is more expensive than white, inexpensive cardstock. So I'm able to do a bunch of die cutting in white and just use my inks to add colors. Another reason this is a time saver is these extra backgrounds that we're creating. These extra backgrounds I'll use in cards later in this video. You can see how beautiful they are. Now let's turn these die cuts into a card and then I'll share more about the gel press. I'm using a sentiment from the Simon Says Stamp Amazing Stamp Set and stamping that onto this white die cut here. This is the one we did with partial die cutting in my last video. So you can see there's a section there that's solid in the middle where I can stamp my sentiment. Again, be sure to watch that other video. I have inked up that stamp with Versamark ink and I'm white heat embossing it. So you won't be able to see it, but there's a white heat embossed sentiment on there. Now I'm going to ink it up. I could have inked it up first, but then I would have had to wait for the die cut to dry before doing the embossing. In this case, I'm putting the pink ink on top and the white embossing will resist it. So watch, I put ink on the gel press, then I put some ink on the back of the die cut and I just kind of flip it over and move it around so the ink gets into all the nooks and crannies. And there we have a pink die cut with white embossing. I do use a dry cloth to wipe the excess ink off of the embossing so it's nice and bright white. I did put additional die cuts behind all of these, just glued them to the back so there would be a little dimension, but you could skip that if you want. Now I'm gluing all of the die cuts onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. I started with the main one that has the partial die cut sentiment on it, and I'm just building everything around it. I like how these die cuts fit together like a puzzle. When it's dry, I can flip it over and cut off anything that's hanging off. Now these little pieces here I could have used in different areas, and therefore I would have had to do less die cutting. However, I wanted to save these extra pieces that I'm cutting off for another card that I plan to do later. So I keep all those pieces. Whenever I put die cuts right up against the edge of a card, I like to use my paper sander along the die cuts on the edge, just to kind of smooth it out so there's no sharp edges. Now here's a look at the completed card. I did add some iridescent gemstones into the pattern that we built. There you can see the colorful die cuts that we have that we created by inking up inexpensive white cardstock. And we have those bonus backgrounds that I'll use later in this video. Let's do another example of inking up die cuts so you can see more of the bonus background building up and I can share some more information. So this time I'm doing some blues and greens and I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Refracted Medallion die. I die cut a bunch of these from inexpensive white cardstock. It doesn't matter what you use. So once again, after inking up that die cut, I smooth out the ink with the brayer on the gel press, the leftover ink, and I put that onto that scrap cardstock piece. This is such an easy way to use up that excess ink and get more cards from the process. If you do not have a gel press, you can definitely do this technique of inking up die cuts with a brayer on a glass work surface or whatever work surface you have. The advantage of using the gel press is it has a little give to it. It's a little soft. So when you apply ink over the die cut with a brayer, it gets into those nooks and crannies and really turns it into a solid color. Also, the gel press is really good about transferring that excess ink onto a scrap piece of paper. But you definitely could do this with a glasswork surface or maybe a silicone mat. So try what you have. But if you have a gel press, you got to try this. It works great. There you can see my bonus background building up. I just move it around and do different sections so I can have different areas of overlap in different areas of the cardstock. Now another thing you can do is to put your die cut down into the ink and then put your cardstock on top. And then you get this little outline or uninked area where that die cut was. Now that's a whole different technique. And I did that in a video, which I'll link to up at the top right here. It's all about using die cuts to create gel press backgrounds. But today I'm focusing on creating colored die cuts and then the bonus backgrounds. This time I'm doing a mini Slimline card. It is 3¼ inches by 6¼ inches. I glued my main die cut to the center. That's the one that I did in my last video using partial die cutting. I white heat embossed a sentiment in the middle of that, and then I built up my other colored die cuts around it. And once again, I did glue additional die cuts behind each for dimension. For the sentiment, I used the Simon Says Stamp Furry Friends stamp set. I really liked the sentiments in this one, and it fit perfectly in the middle of this die cut. So there's a look at all the different colors that I did. I wanted something a bit softer. I also put iridescent gemstones along the pattern that I created. Now notice that smooth die cut there with that sentiment built into it, thanks to the partial die cutting. And all I used on this was white cardstock in ink. So I didn't use any colored cardstock for it. Now this next example, I'm not going to show you the whole process because it's just like the ones we did. But in this case, I used the Simon Says Stamp Circle Rings Medallion. Now this is the piece here that I did the partial die cutting on in the last video. This time I decided to ink it up before stamping. It's perfectly fine to do that. And again, I'm building up those bonus backgrounds to save for later. This time I did the blues and greens and pool colors together, as you see me do here, and I used the peach on a different piece, and I'll build that up with some of my other inking. It's fun to mix and match. So the sentiment I stamped on this one is from the Simon Says Stamp Hibiscus Blooms, and I stamped the missing U with black ink. Now I'm gluing this one first where I want it to be, where I want the focal point on the card to be. And this is a mini Slimline 3¼ by 6¼ inch card. I'm really loving that size. Now I'll just glue the other die cuts equally spaced around it, and I'm just eyeballing it. Again, for all of these die cuts, I die cut 2 additional white die cuts just from cheap white cardstock and glued it behind the colored one for dimension. I personally like that dimension on my cards, but if you prefer, you could glue them straight onto the card, and that would save time too. Now I did trim that background down and added it to a black mini Slimline card, and I put a white insert on the inside. I also put some black gemstones around the missing U so that the eye would be drawn to that sentiment. So again, all of this was done with colored inks instead of colored cardstock. Now, before we step up the technique a bit, I did want to say that this is also something that works really well for single colors. You don't have to build up colors. So in this example, I used the surf colored ink, and I'm putting it onto this partial die cut piece that I created in my last video with the Kaleidoscope Medallion die. I'm just building up color onto this piece. This is the only color I'll add to it. But at the time, I wasn't sure what color I wanted this card to be. So I just did everything in white, and then I added the color I decided at the end with the ink. And if you can't find the perfect color of ink, you could overlap a couple colors with the brayer. Do one application of like a pool color and one application of a green, and you'll end up with a new mint color. That's another advantage of using ink to color your white cardstock. You can end up with an endless number of colors, where we're more limited by the colors of cardstock available to us. So I built some additional dimension behind that partial die cut piece, and I white heat embossed a sentiment at the center, which I'll show you later. I glued that onto a background that I created with the Kaleidoscope embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. The pattern of that matches the pattern that's in that die, which really pulls everything together. You can see that embossing folder adds a lot to the background. I even used it on the flap of our coordinating envelope. I then trimmed all that down and put it onto a 4¼ by 5½ inch note card. I did add a few gemstones to the pattern because that's just what I like to do. This is a very simple card design, but we have added interest by doing the partial die cutting to make that one connected die cut there at the top center. And we have the dimension from the embossing folder and that bright blue color. By the way, that great sentiment that says "From our family to yours" is from the Simon Says Stamp Winter Flower stamp set. That's a particular sentiment that you could use year-round. Okay, now for this next example, a super bright one, I'll be inking up the die cuts in the same way, but creating two bonus backgrounds. This time I have several white die cuts from the Simon Says Stamp Triangle Burst Medallion. I'm putting some cheeky ink onto my gel press with the brayer, laying the die cut on it, and then I'll just keep applying a little bit more ink to both sides of the die cut. Now this time, instead of using one scrap of cardstock, I'll use two. So I am smoothing out the ink on the gel press, the leftover ink. I will take the leftover ink on my brayer and put it onto one piece of cardstock. Then I'll take another piece of cardstock and I'll press that to pick up the leftover ink off my gel press. So this time I have one piece of cardstock for the leftover ink on the brayer and one piece for the leftover ink on the gel press. So I'm creating two bonus backgrounds as I ink up these die cuts. So if you think about it, we're going to make multiple cards at once here. Now, a little thing about these bonus backgrounds. You can try to get different colors of ink in different areas, but don't overthink it. The idea is to get something that kind of naturally comes about. And if you're like me and you overthink crafting, this can be a little hard. But if you just kind of build up color in different areas and not thinking too much about it, I promise it'll work. We'll get back to doing more backgrounds, but first let's finish this one off. I inked our partial die cut piece from the last video with pink ink and I let it dry. I'm lining up some sentiments from this Concord and Ninth set right along that area where we did the partial die cutting. I'm stamping that with Versamark ink and then white and heat embossing. I really liked this kind of playful sentiment from this Concord and Ninth set, and I thought it went with this fun design. Okay, so now I'll heat set this, and then we can add the colored die cuts behind this main one. So I flipped over my partial die cut piece, and I'm putting tape on the back of it. I will then lay that onto our peach inked die cut, but slightly offset. I'll put another piece of tape and lay this on top of the yellow, again slightly offset, which really creates a fun looking, it looks kind of like the spirograph I did as a kid. It kind of changes up the look of that die, which you can see is up there on the top right. This would be great for a sunshine card too. For the background, I used an oldie favorite of mine, the Memory Box Pinpoint Burst die. That just does a pierce pattern that's kind of a burst from the center point. I used that with white cardstock and trimmed it down a bit and added it onto a pink note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. There you can see the colorful inking. It looks like we used a bunch of colored cardstock, but again, we started with all white and added color to it. I also added a few gemstones for sparkle. Let's ink up a few more die cuts and then we'll use those bonus backgrounds and I'll show you different ways to step them up. This time I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Snowflake Trio die set. I use them along with my partial die cutting technique to leave that solid area in the center. I'm inking them up with some bright blues and also like a bright magenta color. Again, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp inks for all these simply because they work great for this technique and the colors are so much fun. Okay, on this, again, I'm putting the excess ink onto one piece of white cardstock, then the excess ink from the gel press onto the other. So I'm building up two bonus backgrounds. This time I also threw in some of my favorite Simon Says Stamp regular die ink. This is the Hot Mama color. I really like it. This shows that you can use their regular die ink line or other die inks for this technique. And I'm building this up onto my two bonus backgrounds too. One time putting the extra ink from the brayer, the other time the extra ink from the gel press. So this time the colors are a little bit different and you can see how they overlap and create really cool looks. So try this with any ink color combinations and really get adventurous. If a little more adventurous than me. I tend to stick with colors that are close to each other on the rainbow, but you can really try anything to create a built-up bonus background. Now, if you have a bonus background and you feel like it needs more color, just take some ink with the brayer and put it on the gel press. And then just put that extra ink onto your bonus backgrounds. You don't have to color a die cut at the same time. The advantage of putting the ink on the gel press is it kind of softens it and allows you to use it on two pieces. Okay, now before we move on to the bonus backgrounds, let's finish off this card with one of the snowflakes. These are the Honeybee Fancy Flakes dies. One cuts the background die, and one adds a piercing pattern to it. I use this for partial die cutting in my last video, but here I'm just using it for a background over one of our bonus backgrounds. So this is a light blue bonus background where you can see there's some light blue and some pool, not much different going on there. I'm going to use the more bold bonus backgrounds later. I put that behind our white Fancy Flakes die cut and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. I took one of my inked snowflakes and added at the top center. And then I added a white heat emboss sentiment from this new Hero Art stamp set that comes out next week. So stay tuned for that. Okay, now let's use more of our bold inked backgrounds, these bonus backgrounds. And let me show you some ways to step them up and use them creatively. So here's one of my bonus backgrounds. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's so cool. And I can get 2 backgrounds out of this one. I'm using that partial die cut piece that you see over on the right for this particular card. I created that with the Dancing Snowflake die and the Detailed Tapestry plate die in my last video. Now I'm putting this pop of bonus color behind it to peek out. I'm trimming it down so I just have a piece that's big enough to go behind our die cut portion at the top there. I want to save as much of the rest of that as I can for other cards. So now I thought I'd step this up by doing a little stenciling on it. I could leave it as is, but one great way to build up some interest is to use stencils. This is the Simon Says Stamp Ornament Builder Stencil Set. You can see there are ornament shapes on the left, and these are just little details you can add to those ornament shapes. I'm just using these dot details on this one. I'm applying some matching ink over this, just kind of doing it uneven so it's not like solid dots everywhere. I wanted it lighter in some areas and darker in others. But this just adds more interest to this inked piece. Another thing I like to do is put white pigment ink over these colorful backgrounds. And use a blending brush and white pigment ink, any white pigment ink would work, and do stenciling with that ink. And I like to dab off the excess ink afterwards so it kind of softens, and look how beautiful that is. So I'll repeat that over this piece also. So I took a colorful piece and just added a bit of interest to it. You could definitely skip this if you wanted to, but it really looks cool with the snowflakes over it, which we'll add in a moment. So I'll put this piece at the top of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card, and look at that beautiful color. I will then take our partial die cut piece from the last video and glue that right on top. I did add some extra pieces of white cardstock to the back of this, so there'd be a bit of dimension, but you could definitely skip that if you wanted to. Once it's dry, I can trim the excess off the top and sides. First sentiment, I'm using the Altenew Bold Thanks die. Now this cuts individual letters for thanks. So I'm taking the negative space of those individual letters and I'm taping it onto my project where I want the letters to be. I then am filling in those open areas of the letters with a little bit of adhesive and then popping in each individual letter die cut. Once this dries, I can remove the negative space and I can be sure that my letters are spaced evenly and they're straight. This is a big time saver. So I'm putting white die cuts here. I will then put another layer of white die cut letters on top of it, and then our inked die cuts, which you can see I cut from a leftover scrap up there on the top. This just allows me to build up those letters so they stand out. And I can use that scrap so it matches the top portion perfectly. I did also stamp You're Fabulous on a little sentiment strip, and that is from the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set. I also added a few purple gemstones for a bit of sparkle. I really liked this design and how all the different elements came together, so I plan to do more, maybe with a floral die at the top for the partial die cutting. All right, let's do another card. This time I'm using the leftover piece of that inked bonus background that we created. I'm not going to do any stenciling to this or anything. I'm leaving it as is because not much is going to show through our die cut background. So this is a partial die cut background that I made with the Honeybee Fancy Flakes dies, and I showed that in the other video. Now, this I originally was going to cut down to be 3 1/4 inches wide. and then put it on a mini Slimline card. This die cut piece is 6 1/4 inches tall, but I really like it as is. It's 6 1/4 inches tall and 4 1/4 inches wide. I decided to leave it as is, and I'll just put it in a 5x7 envelope. So the overall size of this is about 4.5 by about 6.5 inches. Sometimes it's fun to just make a card in a completely different size. Now those snowflakes there, one of my favorite new products, it's the Emboss and Cut Snowflakes from Simon Says Stamp. I showed this in my last video. All you have to do is put a piece of cardstock in an embossing folder, and it creates the embossing of those snowflakes and cuts the shapes, which is brilliant. I'll link to that video so you can see that in action. But those silver embossed snowflakes are a great addition to this background. I like that there are different colors of ink showing through the openings of that background. You got some pink, you got some blue, you got some purple, all that were left over ink that we put on those bonus backgrounds. Now the sentiment is from the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Greetings stamp set. This is a big one. I really like the classic font used in this. It's something that you can use with a variety of styles of cards. Okay, now here is another card. This time I am taking one of my inked backgrounds and stepping it up with a bit of stenciling, stamping, and more. Now, this is as close as this girl gets to mixed media these days. I will tell you, my friend Brianne Loveland, who I will link to her Instagram, she has been trying to get me to do more mixed media. And I'm sticking my toes into it. And this is kind of a controlled mixed media for those of you who are like me, who love the look, but are a little intimidated by it. If you like what I share here, I can do more about this in another video because I think it really is fun. So I have half of one of my inked bonus backgrounds and I'm adding some stamping to it. I have this thank you background stamp and I'm putting ink in one area, then using a dry cloth to kind of rub around that area to soften it so there's no harsh ink lines. I then am taking my background, just choosing an area and pressing that on there. So this put a little bit of text stamping in the corner of the background. And I'm using colors of ink that I use to create the background. Now this isn't completely mixed media because I'm really only using ink, but I kind of consider it that because I'm using different tools with it. I'm using stamps, I'm using stencils, and we did the brayer for the background. So kind of, sort of mixed media, but it really is fun to do. Now I have a falling dot stencil from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm just putting little areas of dots here and there using another one of the colors from the background. Here I have the CZ Design Mini Slimline stencils. Basically, I just grabbed a bunch of different stencils that I have in my stash, and I use them in different areas on the background. This stripe in this one is great for this, and it also has dots and stars. But just look through what you've got because you can do little areas of anything on this background. I'm keeping all of the colors in the same kind of family that I did on the background so it's not too distracting, but you can see I'm adding interest to it. Now I have this incredible Simon Says Stamp Christmas Foliage Stencil Set. This is a new one. It allows you to build up a background, and then there is a stencil that has the entire pattern on it, so you can add some glitter at the end or whatever. It's a really great set. Well, I'm just taking one of those stencils, and I'm using like the little stem portion and inking that onto my background here and there using white pigment ink. I really like to use white pigment ink on these inked backgrounds because it just does a pop of softness that stands out nicely. Now remember, white is a pigment ink, so it takes some time to dry, so I just like to heat set it so I don't accidentally smear it. Now you could stop here with this soft, kind of colorful background, but I thought I'd add a pop of brighter color just to really make it stand out a bit more. You could skip this if you want, but sometimes it's fun to bring in a darker color. So I dug through my stamps and I found this kind of star image in the Simon Says Stamp Oh Holy Night stamp set. And I thought it'd be fun to stamp in 3 places using Simon Says Stamp Hot Mama ink. That's that beautiful plum color that I really have been using a lot lately. Now I kind of did these in 3 spots forming a triangle and kind of off the edge of the card. So this is a very controlled mixed media look that's not really mixed media, but it is fun to do, and I encourage you to try this. Again, if you want me to do another video with other tips, let me know, because this is a great way to dig through your supplies and use some old things together with new. Now I did decide I wanted a little bit of that Hot Mama ink right in the center, right behind where our partial die cut will go. So I'm using that stripe again and just applying a little bit of it to the center. Okay, so now we can assemble our card. I have this partial die cut piece that I made with the Delicate Leaves die from Simon Says Stamp, and I left that solid area in the middle for my stamp sentiment. So I have that partial die cut here on my desk just flipped over, and on the back I'm gluing some additional die cuts. I'm building up 2 or 3 layers of die cuts to the back. I like that dimension. You can skip it if you want. But the way I add dimension to these partial die cuts is I don't do more of the partial die cutting. I just glue this delicate branch down, cut away the excess there in the middle, and do the same thing to the other branch on the other side. Then I just take pieces of scrap cardstock and kind of build up some dimension behind the solid area. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could use foam tape behind this, but I do find that leftover scraps are much better at holding up through the mail, and then foam tape behind things. By building up dimension with leftover scraps, you use up those leftovers, those tiny little pieces, but then you also have more strength when it goes through the mail. You can get into the nooks and crannies and provide better support for that dimension. So it's just something that I like to do, and I find it's a great way to use up those pieces. I do have a bowl where I keep little scraps of cardstock like this, and I reach into that often to put dimension behind die cuts, sentiment strips, and more. So here I've added the dimension to the back. It doesn't look pretty, but it doesn't matter. I put adhesive along all of that, and then I add it onto my card, and it'll pop up nicely and hold up through the mail. I did add a few little purple gems to the leaves just for a bit of sparkle. I like that subtle sparkle that catches the light when the recipient opens it. There you can see our bonus inked background with the addition of some stamping and some stenciling to add more interest. This is really fun to do and a great way to use supplies you haven't used in a while. Now that Missing You is from the Simon Says Stamp Floral Garden Stamp Set. I like the style of that again. It's similar to the holiday set I showed you and worked perfect for this card. Okay, let's completely change gears and take some of our inked bonus backgrounds and add foil to them. You could do this with regular cardstock, but I thought it'd be fun with these inked backgrounds. Now I am using some piercing plates today. This is the Simon Says Stamp piercing plate that just came out, and I think the detail in it is beautiful. It cuts an outside edge, but everything else is just little pierced patterns, and look how gorgeous that is. Well, you can use these piercing plates with a hot foil machine. I have my Spellbinders Glimmer machine over on the left. That's the machine that I use with my Spellbinders Platinum, which is on the right. There are other hot foil machines. You just need to check out which one works with the die cut machine that you have. They all work great. So I have the piercing plate laying on the hot portion of my Glimmer machine, and it has warmed up and is ready to go. I'm taking a piece of Glimmer hot foil, I chose blue, laying it on top, then laying one of my inked backgrounds on that. I'll then put the shims that come with the machine along with one cardstock shim on top, and I'll press the timer button. When the timer is done, it'll show you, you just take all of that out and run it through your die cut machine to apply the pressure. Now I'm doing this pretty quickly, but I have a video all about using dies with your hot foil machine up here on the top right that you can check out. Now check this out. It does a really fine line foiling in that pattern. It's such a cool, subtle look. Now, if I had done a more contrast between the color of foil and background I used, it would stand out more. But I wanted it to be subtle. It just catches the light nicely. I'll turn this into a card in a moment. Next, let's do another example. This is the Simon Says Stamp Detailed Pincushion Plate Die. I used this for partial die cutting in my last video. Now this does cut little holes and do piercing, so it's a combination. Really any type of background die will work great with this foiling technique. So I'm putting all that onto the hot portion of the Glimmer machine, and I'll press the timer button. When the light stops flashing, I take out all of those plates and run it through my die cut machine. So the Glimmer machine provides the heat, the die cut machine provides the pressure. It doesn't actually cut in this case. So check this out. I end up with these fine line details of foil on my bonus inked background, and it really makes it stand out and just gives it some great shine, subtle, fun shine. This time I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Mini Slimline Lattice die. This is just a regular die, no piercing. And I am using a scrap of an inked background. I have my hot foil that I'm putting in there, and I created a little flap, just making sure I had it centered. And then we'll do the hot foil process with the glimmer machine and the die cut machine. This gives a really cool result. I used some glimmer hot foil that is like a silver sparkle, so it catches the light even more with these fine line details that we get from a plate like this. I had a little extra foil where I didn't need it, so I just take a dry brush and rub across it and it'll knock all of that off, and look at how beautiful that is. It sparkles in the light nicely, and I'm actually saving this for a future project. I liked it so much, so stay tuned for that. Here I use the same die on another inked background, same foil, and there you can see the detail we get here too. It's a fun way to add sparkle to a background that isn't too distracting. I thought it would also be good to quickly show you what this looks like on regular cardstock. There's more of a contrast, so it stands out more. This time I'm using another piercing plate, and I'm just using a dark teal cardstock for it. And look how it stands out a bit more on this as opposed to the inked backgrounds. There's more contrast here, and it really gives a gorgeous, classy look. So try this if you have any kind of detail plates like this or background dies that you could use with your glimmer or hot foil machines. Great results. Okay, so now I have some of my bonus backgrounds with the foil added to it. So let's turn those into cards. Now on this one, I trimmed it down to fit on the front of a mini slimline card. And I matted my inked background with a piece of holographic cardstock, so it would have a bit of sparkle around the outside. And then I glued that all onto a 3 1/4 by 6 1/4 white note card. Now I'm adding my partial die cut piece here, this I created in my last video, right to the center. Now I like that this is pretty simple design, but it has interest thanks to the partial die cut technique and the foiling that we did on our bonus inked background. I chose an inked background here that didn't have a lot of different colors on it. I wanted something that was a little more solid-like so the foil would stand out. So that's why it's all just blues. Here, as I tilt it in the light, you can see the holographic cardstock behind it, the matte there. I added some holographic gemstones and then that beautiful foil in the background. Here is another that I created with one of our foiled bonus backgrounds. This time I used the branch die partial die cut piece I created in the last video. And you can see that foiling on the background. It just adds some fun sparkle. Now along the partial die cut portion there in the middle, the solid area, I stamped your one of a kind from the Simon Says Stamp Tiny Words stamp set. And then I added a thanks die cut where I used some blue holographic cardstock on the top so it would match that foil in the background and kind of pull it all together. I also added some blue gemstones. Now that thanks is from one of my all-time favorite Simon Says Stamp die sets, the Big Thanks die set. I didn't use the shadow die this time, just the word itself. So I'm out of time on this video. It's long enough as is, but I still have several leftover pieces that I created in this video and my last. I really like when you can use a technique in many ways to create many pieces, to create many cards at once. But I think I'll save these for later. So if you are interested in anything that I showed in this video, I do link it below in my YouTube description. I encourage you to go through your stash and see what things you can create using these different techniques. And by the way, if you're looking for something to put on your wish list for Christmas, I recommend that gel press. It's inexpensive and a great tool to use over and over in many ways. All right, thank you for watching. Here at the end, I'll link to a couple other videos for you to check out. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.